With so much talk lately all over the internet and the media about a dreaded recession, many people who are considering moving to Atlanta, Georgia want to know how a recession could affect Atlanta real estate. Let's talk about that right now. What's up, y'all? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Victor. I'm a local real estate agent here in Metro Atlanta, and I put out weekly videos all about living in Atlanta, Georgia. We talk about the schools, we talk about the community, we talk about what the homes are like. So if you're thinking about moving to Atlanta or you just want to know what it's like to live here, feel free to call, text, or email me anytime. Thank you so much to everyone who has reached out. I'm always happy to help. But right now, let's talk about what it would look like in Atlanta, Georgia, if we did experience a recession. And you might be thinking, we already are experiencing a recession here in Atlanta. And I think there are a few things that we could see if we do experience a recession in the United States or here in Atlanta. And one of the first ones, and certainly the most obvious, is that in a recession, we're going to see less buyers with reduced average income and potentially people losing jobs. That's going to certainly lead to there being less buyers in the housing market, which means there'll be less demand for homes in the housing market. There's no question that that's one of the most likely effects that we would see in Atlanta if we had a recession. And with less buyers and less demand for homes means that we would also have a kind of a turn in the housing market towards it being a buyer's market. For the last 4, 5, 6, maybe even 10 years, it's really been a seller's market in many parts of the country, including here in Atlanta. But if there are less buyers than there are homes for sale, we would see a buyer's market. And this means that really the buyers would begin to dictate what it would look like for a transaction. Right now, the sellers kind of dictate many of the details in a transaction, like when the closing date is, or how much deposit a buyer is going to put down, or the amount of days for an inspection period. And this is because it's a seller's market. But if we're in a buyer's market, it's going to be the buyers who dictate these kinds of specific things in a contract. In addition to that, we're not going to see multiple offer situations in a recession. That's certainly not something that you would see in that kind of economy. And then we'll see longer days on market for homes. Right now, the average days on market for a home in Metro Atlanta is about a week to 2 weeks, depending on what city or what county it's in. But if we're in a recession, we're going to see days on market last longer, for maybe a month or even 2 months for the average listing. So really, the effect of having a recession in Atlanta would certainly mean far less demand and the housing market becoming a buyer's market. In addition to that, something else that's very likely that we would see is lender programs that give assistance to buyers. Right now, it's very rare for lenders to provide things like down payment assistance or for lenders to cover things like closing costs. But if we have less buyers in the market, that means we would have less people applying for loans. And so lenders would come out with more programs to incentivize buyers to take out loans. Things like down payment assistance would come back. Things like lowering closing costs, that would also become the norm in a recession here in Metro Atlanta. So certainly some ups and downs to there being less buyers. But again, if you are able to afford a mortgage during a recession, you certainly would have a big advantage over the sellers in a recession. And then another likely situation that we would see in Metro Atlanta if there was a recession is that we would see less people putting their homes on the market. Right now, there are many people who have very low interest rates. If we have less buyers on the market, we're certainly going to see a decrease in home values. And if people are seeing that their home value is decreasing, they're likely not going to be as willing to sell their homes. So this is going to lead to kind of a stagnation in the market. There won't be as many transactions happening per month or per week. If we have less buyers, it's going to lead to a decline in home values, which means that there's going to be less sellers in the market. So overall, we'll see far less activity in the housing market. Something super important to think about here is that many people have interest rates on their mortgages right now as low as 3%, maybe 4%. Either way, right now, many people's interest rates are very good compared to the current interest rates that are being offered, 6.5% or even 7%. So these people who have great interest rates on their mortgage, they're not very likely to give up that interest rate and move to a new mortgage where they have a interest rate of 7%. That's probably not going to happen, especially if their home value goes down. And so while the idea of a recession here in Metro Atlanta does look very gloomy for the real estate market, there are actually a few things that are going on here in Metro Atlanta that are very unique to the rest of the country. As far as metropolitan cities go, really Atlanta is positioned to be kind of one of the better faring cities among all of the metropolitan cities in the United States. And there are a few reasons for why Atlanta would do so well in 2023 and why Atlanta would do so well in a recession. In fact, I can think of about 3 reasons why Atlanta would do so much better than some of the other cities around the country. And these 3 things that make Atlanta unique compared to the other major cities of the US are super important to take into consideration if you're moving to Atlanta. So let's talk about the 3 reasons why Atlanta would do so well in a recession. The first reason why the real estate market would do so well in Atlanta compared to other parts of the country is that the cost of living and the cost of homes is significantly lower in Atlanta than other major cities in the US. The average home value in New York is $783,000. In Los Angeles, the average home value is $921,000. In Miami, the average home value is $530,000, and in Denver also $530,000. But here in Atlanta, the average home value is about $475,000. So when we look at some of the major cities of the US, Atlanta certainly has some of the best home values and is one of the reasons why Atlanta real estate would do so well in a recession. And then the second reason is the amount of job growth and business growth that's happening here in Metro Atlanta. For example, Microsoft, Apple, and Visa are all coming from the West Coast to here in Atlanta. And these companies obviously provide lots of jobs. And it's not just those 3 companies. We also have Home Depot, we have the Coca-Cola company, we have Delta Airlines, and one of the busiest airports in the world in Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport. We also have NCR Corporation and Equifax, all major businesses, major companies that are providing jobs here in Metro Atlanta. So this growing job market is another factor that would really help the city of Atlanta in case there is a recession. And then reason number 3 is the population growth. We have lower home values, we have job growth. So all of these things mean that the city of Atlanta is experiencing a population growth more so than other parts of the United States. The reason that's important is because it goes back to the issue of housing demand. In a recession, it's very likely that we would see less buyers, less demand. But in the city of Atlanta, we're experiencing an increase in population, which means we would be seeing an increase in demand. And these 3 factors mean that Atlanta is really positioned to do the best of all of the major cities in the United States in case there is a recession. But it's certainly not all great for the city of Atlanta. We really do have some other issues that we need to talk about in case there is a recession. And one of those things is that if we do have a recession in the housing market and we see home values go down and we see buyer demand go down, that inevitably means that we'll see more big companies, more corporations purchasing investment properties, which is already an issue here in the city of Atlanta, but in a recession, we would see even more of that. If less people are able to purchase a home, this means that the demand for rental properties would go up, and these big corporations would continue to buy up many of the properties all around the city of Atlanta, which would increase rental values. It would mean that renting would become even more difficult than it already is here in the city of Atlanta. And big corporations, big companies owning real estate is not really good for the real estate market. If we see a large percentage of real estate being owned by big corporations, it would become very easy for those big corporations to kind of determine pricing and to kind of collaborate to make purchasing a home or renting a home more difficult, or they could also sell those properties at the same time. And so it's really not good for a housing market. And then another negative thing that we would see here in Metro Atlanta if there is a recession is delayed new construction. Already in the last 6 to 9 months here in Metro Atlanta, many of the new construction developments have slowed down or even come to a pause. A year ago, when there was a lot more buyer demand, the new construction companies really were pumping out homes left and right. It was like super normal in all of the cities to see lots of new construction. But when interest rates went up about 6 to 9 months ago and buyer demand fell significantly, these new construction companies realized that there was far less demand. So they really put a halt to a lot of the new construction. All around here in Metro Atlanta, there are lots of new construction developments that have just completely stopped, that have not seen any new development in the last 6 to 9 months. So another thing that we would see in a recession is these new construction companies would almost completely stop. And this would obviously be bad in an area like Metro Atlanta, where the demand is increasing, where the population is growing. So we have housing demand increasing, but the development of new homes would stop. So this would certainly lead to a negative effect in the housing market. It would lead to purchasing a home more difficult. It could mean that we would see an increase in home values in a recession, and that would certainly be a bad thing for many buyers. And new construction is kind of different than buying a home that has already been built. So when you purchase a home that has already been built, it's very typical to put a deposit down when you make an offer. And typically that deposit is about 1% of the purchase price. So if you're buying a $700,000 home, you typically put down a deposit of about $7,000 that is held by the closing attorney. With new construction, however, it's a very different scenario. It's a very different process for buying new construction. And one of the main differences with buying new construction is that the deposit that you put down for new construction is 20%. And that's before even a home has started being built. So it's like you go to the new construction office, you tell them, hey, you want to buy this lot, and you pick out your floor plan, and you do all the fun part of buying new construction. But right there, before they even start building the home, they charge a 20% deposit that is just about non-refundable. With purchasing a home that's already built, that deposit is refundable if the seller defaults on the contract. With new construction, it's very difficult to get that 20% deposit back. And so buying a new construction is already very difficult, but in a recession, it would certainly make things even more difficult. And then lastly, the big thing that everybody wants to know is, are we going to see a housing market crash? And I have a very strong opinion about a housing market crash. We're not going to see a housing market crash. To me, the definition of a housing market crash is when you have an error in a market that leads to a crash. It's like in 2008 when the business practices or the lending practices of lenders was unethical. This led to a crash. And a crash is not when home values decrease. A crash is when home values become like nobody knows what the value of a home is. That's really what a crash is. In 2008, we experienced that. There was a time where right after the housing market crashed, many people were like, we don't know what the value of our home is. It's not like the home values decreased. It's not like they didn't want to sell their home because home values decreased. It was like, we don't know what the value of the home is because the housing market crashed. What we're seeing today, and what we could see even more in a recession, is a decrease in home values. And a decrease is actually really a normal and healthy part of not only the housing market, but any market. It's normal to see ups and downs in any market, and it's the sign of a healthy market. But a crash is something completely different. In fact, logically, you couldn't predict a crash, because if you knew that a crash was coming, you would just wait for the crash to happen and then pump a whole bunch of money into the market, which would prevent the crash. So logically, a crash is not something that you can predict. A crash is a symptom of a bigger problem that is unexpected. So no, I don't think that the housing market is going to crash, not only in Atlanta, but anywhere in the United States. Of course, making the move to Atlanta can sometimes be overwhelming, and there really is so many moving parts to moving to the city of Atlanta or moving to any city. Of course, if you're thinking about moving to Atlanta and you're not sure where to start, I made a video exactly about that. Here we talk about the very first steps of moving to Atlanta. I'll see you there.